Analysts at Melius Research say airline stocks typically do best in the current environment when demand is high and capacity is constrained. But the firm initiated coverage on the industry with a neutral rating. While pent-up demand for travel is strong, it may not continue to be. Joining us to discuss is Melius Research Director of Airline and Travel Research, Conor Cunningham. Conor, it's great to see you. Before we sort of get to this formula, if you will, I do want to ask you about the current picture for what we see for travel. And just the team is probably going to laugh because they've been hearing me on an anecdotal basis talk about various relatives of mine who have had trouble traveling, cancellations. I'm sure you have some similar stories. Why can't the airlines get it together, right? I mean, this has been going on for months now where you have this kind of situation.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a challenge. I was probably on this network a year ago saying the same thing. The summers when surging demand happens, the airlines have struggled to maintain operational integrity. It starts with weather, snowballs into staffing shortages. There's a lot of construction going on. There's just a lot of constraints on the overall infrastructure of aviation in general. So it's the airlines, part of it's stuff that's out of their hands from just again infrastructure being challenged and weather being what it is. I think that what the airlines are doing now, so operations are the biggest focus for everyone. Everyone's taken their foot off the gas in terms of adding capacity. They're trying to allow their networks to normalize. That will, is very good for pricing longer term, but will be a cost headwind in the near term. At the same time, you just have open labor contracts across the board, makes profitability, a challenge at times for some of the airlines. You guys talked a fair bit about, the U.S. dollar being really strong. I mean, that's one of the bright spots, I would say. International demand has been off the charts. If you look at just search trends from the U.S. to really anywhere, but mostly to Europe, they've been very, very good. You kind of see this elongated peak travel season on the international side. So, there are some struggles domestically. Weather is what it is. Staffing shortages are really challenging. There's a lot of training bottlenecks, but they've taken a step back and started to normalize what their networks need to look like to kind of to be where they are from an asset perspective. And that should be better from an operations standpoint. So hopefully all your relatives that were delayed over the summer, that will be a thing of the past. We will see. We are going into seasonally slower periods now. So that tends to be pretty good for the group and the operation in general.
And Conor, one of the big problems too, and we've gotten reports of this recently, the airline industry unable to get the parts they need to keep planes essentially flying. I mean, does this get worse before it gets better?
Yeah, I mean, it speaks again to just like the the infrastructure constraints that the industry faces. So supply chain is a problem. Boeing and Airbus have their own issues in terms of even new deliveries. So again, like I think what investors really struggle with is just we're talking about a lot of really near-term issues, and so no one feels very comfortable with what's happening near-term. So it's really hard to have this longer-term view if you have no really good sense of where capacity is going to be, 6 months from now or like 2 weeks from now. So American Airlines made a big cut towards their November schedule. Delta asked for slot waiver restrictions to be extended into September. There's just a lot of issues that face the group from a capacity standpoint. So if you can't feel comfortable with like actual seats and where they're going to be flying and when they're going to be flying, it's really hard to be constructive on the group 12 months from now, and when people start to look into 2023. Like one thing that I've talked a lot with investors as of late is just like, I expect the industry to be 6.5% larger by 2023. That number is that's where we're at right now. But it's not going to get larger. It's probably going to shrink. So, again, like where does Boeing and Airbus come out in terms of their own issues with deliveries? So, there's just a lot of uncertainty. I know that doesn't make people feel great when they try to look at investments in the group. But, you could talk about some bright spots like the airlines that have, made some of these adjustments already. I think Delta's being really conservative with how they approach their capacity outlook. I think that Alaska Air Group is being very conservative with how they approach the outlook as well. Southwest, our top pick, I think will be fairly constrained on the capacity side. And I think that they've faced a lot of the issues on the cost side that airlines are facing now. So some of that stuff's behind them. I'm hopeful that the slower growing carriers will do better in the next 6 to 12 months.
Conor, what's going to happen with pricing here? Are we going to see pricing start to moderate a little bit? If indeed we're going to start to see demand come off, isn't pricing going to have to come off too?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. Like, how does the consumer deal with inflation that's been growing faster than wage growth? I mean, that's the biggest question that's out there right now. I've used this anecdote a fair bit. Like, there's a massive shift in spending to services from goods. You sat in your house for 2.5 years. Are you going to buy another sofa? Probably not. So if you do have money and you change jobs and your wages did move up, like, you're probably spending more on going to restaurants, traveling, and so on. So there's this natural pent up demand dynamic that should continue into the near term. If a recession hits and unemployment starts to go up, like, all bets are off. Like, it's hard to really say, but from a demand perspective right now, if demand is what it is and there's enough constraints on capacity, pricing's like, there is an argument that pricing should almost in theory accelerate. One thing that I think a lot of folks are looking for is just, what does the corporate side of the equation look like? We're getting out of this peak summer travel season and moving into the fall, which is typically when corporate kind of takes over. There's still a lot of uncertainty on what that's going to look like. With tech companies, tech companies now are starting to push people to go back to the office. I think financial services folks are doing that as well. That should be a boon for travel on the corporate side. But again, there's just enough uncertainty on the macro environment that it's really hard to make a good constructive call on that. Right. And I think that's what the airlines are struggling with. But yeah, pricing is going to be high as long as capacity is constrained.
You're killing me, Conor. And for some reason, I don't know. For some reason, I can stomach going out and having a meal that's more expensive. For some reason, the airline price is going up, especially because the service is so bad. Just infuriates me. But speaking of which, I have sort of a final question for you. And that has to do with the new proposal coming from the FAA to change the parameters of when you can get a refund as an airline customer, to make it more specific, the definition of what a significant delay is, which would potentially increase the number of refunds that the airlines are forced to give. Or on the flip side, maybe force them to not cancel as many flights. Imagine that. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that rule is going to go through, and is it going to have a material effect on the airlines?
I don't have a great insight into the DC on that. I mean, I would just say that it's expensive to run a bad operation. Airlines don't want to do it. Like, they know it's inconvenient for everyone, and it's not profitable either. And so they're trying to avoid it. And so I think, the July numbers were pretty good from an operations standpoint. And so they are getting better. Again, we're going into the seasonally slower time period. So the operations should ease with that as well. But yeah, they're trying to avoid all this stuff. They don't want the FAA to kind of come in and start to push them around from that regard. Like, they realize that the issues are at hand. When I was going through my initiation process, talked to every single airline to ask the same questions, like, what are the gating factors towards your growth? And every single one said the operation. They want it to be better. They don't want it to be worse. They're trying to make everyone travel with ease and get out there again and feel normal from that standpoint. It's just, there are a lot of constraints. And so they are trying to size their networks now and their capacity to what they have on campus. And so I think that's the first right step. And now it's about, while they add back, they got to make sure that they can maintain the operational integrity. If they can't, capacity rolls back. Unfortunately, I mean, you can talk about the pricing side, like, it will be a pricing good guy for the industry, a cost headwind though. So it's not like they're just gonna cut seats and all of a sudden profitability is going to be wild. It's just a delicate balance. Point being is they want to run a better op. That's really what the focus is right now.